Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild Encounter Compendium Grimm Encounters, designed by JVC Parry and Jeff C. Stevens for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, and Pretty Boy and Yuma. Thank you all very much for your support. So if you're wondering, yes, I did review Grimm Encounters 2, 2 or maybe 3 weeks ago. And in doing so, I've gotten a review copy for Grimm Encounters 1. And one of my biggest questions when I reviewed Grimm Encounters 2 was, why these fairy tales? So the Grimm Encounters series is a collection of a dozen encounters, both in 1 and 2, that are inspired from the Brothers Grimm classic fairy tales, like 100 stories of just everything that, Disney's obviously used a bunch, and just all these different classic tales designed for D&D. And I was reading through the second one going like, well, where are the really classic ones that everybody knows? The Hansel and Gretel and the Red Riding Hood and Three Little Pigs. Turns out they're here. They are, in fact, here in Grimm Encounters 1. So that answers a pretty obvious question there. I feel a little stupid knowing that I was reviewing the sequel and made that comment like, oh, well, of course they already explored them in this first one. So we're going to explore that. We're going to take a look at the first Grimm Encounters and see what all is inside. So, as the second one is, this one includes a dozen encounters. And encounters is an important terminology here. These are not like one-shots, these are not mini-dungeons, these are very much encounters. And especially in this one more than the second one. Very, very brief. An encounter literally means like a single combat encounter for a lot of these, which I found kind of disappointing for the most part. And I'll get into that in a bit, and kind of like the last one where there are some that are just better than others, but I did really like that most of these are at least instantly recognizable. The CR value is from, I believe, 1 to 7, so you're still looking at Tier 1 and Tier 2. And I did like there is a lot of encounter scaling, so they do that little box text that says if you want to scale, plus or minus however many levels or CR rating in this case, which is very handy. So it actually, I say 1 to 7, but technically you can work with it however for quite a few different levels. I don't know if I'll go through every single one of these, but as I said, one of my chief complaints, I hate to start with a complaint, but they're just kind of really straightforward. There's not a lot of like twists or story interest here. So this one is the Pied Piper, which is a classic story of this kind of figure coming to rid this town of rats and leads the children away for nefarious purposes. And in this case, it's a barbed devil is the actual Piper, which, okay, that's kind of a twist, I guess. Except there's really not. He is just leading the children away. The players actually get there early or late to where he's already taken the children. They come originally for the job of getting the rats out, and they say oh no, somebody already did the rat problem, but now he's taking the children. And then there's it takes 2 pages to explain this, but there's just a skill check to have to hunt them down, and then there's a wave of rats that the players have to fight, which sounds super boring for CR4 to just tackle waves of giant rats. 3 waves of 4 giant rats attack them at 50-foot intervals, which sounds like a fucking slog to run. Giant rats are terrible. They're really, there's nothing about them. And for CR4, that's forgettable, and you're just kind of you need to try to create a sense of pacing here, because it's all about the fact that the players do have a chance to rescue the children, but they have to do it in 5 rounds. And so it even says at one point, during the 4th round, the party should hear the music change, and that knows that, I think it's an avalanche is going to come kill all the children. So it's more about speed than killing anything. And that part would hopefully make it a little more interesting, but otherwise it's just kind of a straightforward fight here with rats and a barbed devil. Big Bandit Company is a play on the Three Little Pigs. And the funny thing here is that there is a werewolf, is the big bad wolf. He's stolen things from these merchants, so they're not carpenters or builders, they're just merchants. But the twist here is that they're not pigs. They're people, but they've been affected by lycanthropy to change into were-boars, which shocks everybody, and it's supposed to be a big surprise. So you're fighting this werewolf and his bandits, and then all of a sudden the merchants you're like supposed to be helping transform into were-boars and kind of add to the fight. So I did like that as being a little bit of an extra shocker and a really funny thing because it's not this one more than the others doesn't quite show its hand about like what it's about, because you don't think about three merchant brothers saying that there's a werewolf led by bandits. I don't think that would immediately clue you into what's going on, but then when they start transforming into werewolves, you're like, oh, three little pigs, okay. So I think that's actually a pretty effective little twist there, even though it's still a very, very... And I mean, again, these are encounters. These aren't, I don't expect them to be full-fledged adventures or anything of that nature. So I get that they're supposed to be encounters, but I do think doing fun things within those encounters is what should be the goal, and at least this one does have a little bit more. This one, The Boy Who Doesn't Know Fear, I'm not familiar with this tale. It sounds a bit like Pet Cemetery in terms of there's this like kid that's brought back to life, but he's kind of fucked up, and it just turns out that this dagger is actually possessed by some undead spirits. Which this one I did. The conclusion isn't that interesting because you just fight the undead spirits at the end, but I did like that there's a lot of building. You see, it's actually 2 full pages. There's a lot of build up with trying to figure out like what's wrong with the kid, and the initial quest I think is to try to scare him, which is bizarre, but he's like no emotion. He's like super creepy kid, and eventually like the wizard who brought him back to life, you have to like confront him, and then he actually attacks at one point, and then kind of have to mollify him. So I did kind of like the role playing involved here, but again, everything is basically just leading to combat. These two are both very just kind of forgettable, the Fisherman's Wife and then the Hansel and Gretel mission. Hansel and Gretel mission especially, you literally just get the quest of like, oh, somebody's stealing children, and then you just go to a hut and there's a green hag there who's already eaten the children. You just find bones and you just fight her. That is, like, I don't want to be too mean about it, but like anybody could have come up with that. Like there's nothing really going on there. It's just like, yeah, okay, there's the witch. You turned her into a green hag, stat block, and then you just have to fight this witch. You can't even save the children. There's nothing going on in that combat encounter. There's just nothing. There's nothing going on there. The Fisherman's Wife, I was disappointed with because it has such a cool setup. It's got the that classic concept of a loved one is undead, and so they're trying to protect their loved one, but they're doing like horrendous things to protect them. And I totally admit I did this 100% in our Tomb of Annihilation campaign. If you've been watching our campaign, which if you're watching my channel, you probably are, I totally did this conceit, this story trope, which is the loved one it turned into some kind of monstrous ghoul thing, and then there's somebody else who's trying to protect them. They're not necessarily evil, but they're kind of doing evil things because they're trying to protect their loved one, who is basically a monster. And this is that entire situation. And it's a creepy setup because it's literally like a hooded figure in the middle of a lake in this little boat with a rope leading off, and the fisherman's just trying to play it off like, oh, that's my wife. She's just kind of a loner, and she's kind of sick, and don't worry about it. That's such a neat thing because it's so creepy, and you don't know what's going on, and it turns out she's a ghoul, and he's like trying to like lead people to feed her. The problem is what happens, he just pulls the boat to shore, she springs out as a ghoul and attacks the party, and that's the whole thing. I was really disappointed in how that ended up because I know it's CR1, but a ghoul is just not going to do not anything to a party of it. D&D is all about action economy. So assuming a 4-person party, a ghoul is just not that scary to level 1s. I mean, it's all about the rolls. Obviously, if you hit somebody, you're probably downing them, which is scary. And I guess maybe I'm trying to think, because I did unleash a ghoul with a bunch of people at my party. They were level 2 at the time, and that's a big difference. But I don't know. It doesn't seem that... Again, it's CR1, so I get one to do an easy encounter. That's cool. But I think it would have been so much more effective had it been like somehow the players had to like go out on a boat to like go... maybe if like there was no rope, there was just a boat leading out, and the fisherman was like, oh, can you go bring my wife in? I'm sorry, she doesn't have any oars or something, and the player had to like take a boat out there, and then all of a sudden they're isolated on this really... scary situation, and maybe they're separated from the party or something, and then that gets really interesting. Like, do something with the fact that you created this neat setup other than we just bring her in and she attacks. That was kind of disappointing. And same thing with Redcap. It's just this little little dwarf gnome thing with a bunch of mushrooms, and the part that he can slice the mushrooms and that causes different effects is kind of neat, but Otherwise, it's just a cave with a dude in there. Although, again, these encounters, they're easy to just drop into places, too. Next time your player's in a cave, you can just have this encounter in there, which that's fine. They don't have to be these big, complex, multifaceted, you know, chain of events or anything like that. So I get that, but I still wish there was a bit more meat here. The Puss in Boots one is again, I like it when there's a little bit of role playing in here, which there's this little intelligent cat that eventually leads them to the Oni that cursed the cat, which again is just a very straightforward combat encounter in the end. This one is my favorite, so I've been complaining this whole time, but there are some good ones in here, I promise. And Not Another Cinderella Story is fantastic. It is probably my favorite of the bunch. It turns Cinderella into a warlock of the Archfey, her fairy godmother being obviously the like evil fairy person. She has gotten her revenge. You know, she never did get to go to the ball, so she got her revenge and she got this power and turned the stepmother and stepsisters into ghouls, and then she kind of entranced the Prince Charming to help her with this plan. And then the Prince Charming runs out of this manor and says, "Oh, you need to help me. There's monsters in here that have trapped my beloved, Cinderella." And the players have to rush in there and kill these ghouls, and they do, and they try to find Cinderella, and meanwhile Cinderella's actually watching the whole time, and she raises the ghouls back up, and then when the players re-emerge from the cellar, everybody attacks the players into this big epic fight, and it's really, I mean, it's even broken down into a small dungeon, and this is kind of what I'm talking about. This one even goes above and beyond by actually creating a full-fledged dungeon with a grid map on there, which I'm really impressed with. They did not have to do this, because again, these are encounters, and I'm less inclined, and I kind of mentioned that with my other one, is I'm less inclined to mark points for not having that maps included in all these encounters, even though most of these are combat encounters, but this is a really nice one that kind of goes above and beyond in that case. But I just like the setup here. It sounds like it's a really fun one to run, because you've got villains that are doing things and have their own motivations, and I like the fact that they kill the ghouls initially, and you think, okay, we've saved the day, we just have to rescue Cinderella, and it turns out she's the villain, and she raises the ghouls back up. Like, all of that seems like a lot of fun to run, but also still keeping it a fairly, relatively encounter. Even though it is a full area, it still feels like a single encounter. You can just meet this on the road. The prince runs out, and leads them back to this manor. So I think that's a good example of the best one of the bunch. Red Riding's Hood. Ken Carcas, man, I'm starting to realize that you are just a dark motherfucker. Because he always writes the most messed up shit. Which was true in Grimm Encounters 2, and it's certainly true here. So the twist, I think, is kind of cool. It's instead of having the big bad wolf be a villain and you rescuing this little girl, turns out the little girl is possessed by her cloak, which is literally like a Venom Carnage type symbiote that she murders for. And literally, it's so grisly and awful. You find like the remains of the wolf, and literally you have to roll, a con saving throw or become poisoned, and you vomit for 2d6 rounds because of the shock of the body. Like, that's messed up. And then when the players reach grandmother's house, they find that grandmother is like been, I don't even want to describe it, but she's like killed and been disemboweled, and the child is eating like a kidney. This child. Ken. Man. Holy crap. And the players, upon seeing that, have to succeed on a DC 20 saving throw, become frightened and incapacitating, spending the next 3 rounds vomiting. Which is funny, but also not fun. Nobody wants to spend 3 rounds literally locked down. And a DC 20 con saving throw is pretty much guaranteeing that's going to happen to the entire party at CR6. So, I don't know. This one is a little too... I like the idea, but kind of like what he did with the second one, it's way too messed up for the kind of campaigns I run. Snow White is a very, very fun play on the name. It's a twist similar to the others, the Red Riding Hood and the Cinderella one, where it turns those heroines into the monsters, which is fun, but now that I've seen it overlap this many times, I'm less inclined with it, and I kind of felt that reading Snow White, especially with the order of events here, with this one being the last one. And I was like, okay, well, same thing here, where it's just you turn the princess into the actual monster. And this one, unfortunately, is not like the other Cinderella one, where it's not that interesting to run. It's just that she was taken by the dwarves to try and, I guess, undo this curse that she fell dead on her wedding day. Turns out she rose back up as a white, killed the dwarves and now controls them as zombies, and they're just like in a cave somewhere, and it's just very, very straightforward. You just fight the white and her 7 zombies. So I feel like, I mean, again, that's a fun twist, but there's just not much else going on here. And it turns out I guess I am going through all of these because that's kind of the fun way to do it. The Tailor and the Giant is the most role-playing one of the bunch, so for that alone, I appreciate it. This is the a hill giant needs a suit for his wedding day, which is fun. There's a lot of role-playing involved in there. In fact, there's a little random like combat encounter right before with a bunch of skeletons. This is a CR1 mission, so you're not meant to fight this hill giant, which makes this part really funny, which is you're supposed to do a series of skill checks to complete this suit. And while you're doing it, there's a bunch of fucked up stuff that happens with the giant. He literally like picks out nearly dead humans, and like he rips off an arm and uses it to pick. What is? I'm just gonna read this. Brig removes a nearly dead human man, pulls off an arm, and uses it to pick the remains of a goblin he just ate from his teeth. The man screams and cries until Budge is his name, takes hold of the man's legs and yanks, splitting the man in half, doing so directly overhead of one of the adventurers. Now that kind of macabre is hilarious. It's funny because the players are doing this for him, and this character is doing horrible, horrible things. But because the players are CR1, they're like, we can't really take on a real giant, you know. The skill checks aren't that hard, but if you fail the skill checks, then he'll get mad and he could attack. So I just appreciate this one because it's not necessarily combat. It's just kind of a tricky skill check, but there's also these funny things for the DM to do. It's not just, okay, roll these checks, roll these checks, roll these checks, do you succeed or fail? It's, okay, while you're doing this, you know, he removes a dead bugbear from his sack, tosses it aside and says he doesn't like it. And then he removes a dead dwarf woman who wakes up and starts screaming, and he like pounds her against the floor, really messed up, just breaking all her bone. Like that's fucked up. But it's fun to run. It makes it a little interesting without being too like horribly violent and grisly, although it's still kind of on the edge of that, but I like that one. I think that one is very memorable. Trapped in Iron, I'm not very familiar with the story, the Iron Stove. This one turns into a gauntlet. The players are given a mission from this Iron Flask, creature in Iron Flask. Turns out the creature is out in league with the, a succubus at the end. I appreciate this one because it is kind of a mini death trap dungeon, which is fun. There's a gelatinous cube in a pyramid. Does that make it a gelatinous pyramid? Something to think about. It's a glass pyramid the players have to climb over, but they have a chance of falling through, shattering it, and thus falling into the gelatinous pyramid, which is funny. Otherwise, it's not much story, very straightforward. I do appreciate that we have a little bit of a combat, or a little bit of a dungeon encounter here, though. I always like seeing that in my encounters, and that pretty much does it. So, overall, I like the fact that we used more recognizable fairy tales. You know, Snow White, Cinderella, Three Little Pigs, Red Riding Hood, all that. That is more fun than the second one in that regard. I don't like that there's a lot less variety here than the second one. The second one, that was one of my pros, was it had a good variety of role-playing and mystery, as well as combat and like skill checks and all that. This one, it is 90% combat encounters, and probably half of those combat encounters are literally just a one-page, like, go somewhere and fight a thing. Like the Hansel and Gretel one, the Redcap one, the Pied Piper has slightly more involved, and the one with the cat, the Puss in Boots, slightly more involved in the beginning, just to kind of set it up and basically get the players to the thing, where they just have a straightforward encounter with like a witch or whatever it is, an Oni or something. And they're just not super interesting. Like it's not very compelling. It just feel like you didn't quite use the source material in some fun ways. Whereas I do think that like Red Riding Hood does a fun twist on the events. At least Snow White, while it's not that fun to run, has a fun twist on the event. Cinderella does do the best job of having a twist on the characters and situations while also looking like it is very fun to run, having a little like dungeon involved and all that. The Tailor and the Giant at least involves some role-playing and skill checks and just funny like things going on, which makes it interesting other than just, like that one, if it was written like the others, would be like, okay, now you fight the hill giant. It's just straightforward combat doesn't quite interest me as much, especially when that's like half the content here. So I'm kind of a mixed mind if I like it more than the other, because I do like the fairy tales themselves more than the second one, but I think the actual content might be better in the second one than in this one. So let's go over my quick pros and cons for Grimm encounters. Pros: each encounter is very well organized, which is how the second one was written as well, explaining the type, the CR tier, and the premise right from the start. So for every single one of these, you get actually, you don't get the premise here, you get DM notes, which basically explains, like, just from the DM, like, what is going on. Give me a single paragraph, tell me that elevator pitch, what's going on, as well as telling me, what story is this based on, and what the CR is. Type is kind of funny in this one because literally they all say combat and something because they all have combat involved. Pro: this one uses highly recognizable fairy tale stories such as Red Riding Hood, Three Little Pigs, Cinderella, and Snow White. That is a big pro over the second one. So if you want to delight your players with the much more recognizable fairy tale content, this is definitely the better one to use over the second one. Although they're both good in that regard. Pro: there's extensive encounter scaling for most of the encounters, which is good because there is a lot of combat here. And I say extensive because they really do, a couple of them only do like 2 or 3, but some of them are, like the Hill Giant one, I think could go from like CR 1 to 10, which is nuts. If I can scroll down and find, like, here, this one scales from CR 3 to 8 for Snow White. There we go. So the giant one can scroll from CR 1 to CR 10, where you literally just Budge brings his best man Blimp, the Hill Giant, with him. There's just 2 Hill Giants, and then the DC skill checks went up, so that's an easy change, but I appreciate that. Like, so if you want to be able to use these encounters for more level ranges, the options are certainly there. Cons: I mentioned this in the first one, and it's the CR value is listed instead of the level range. That's just kind of a very nitpicky thing for me, but just give me the level range. Tell me what levels I should be using here would be appropriate. And I get that CR equals level for the most part, I think, but that would just be easier to read. But the biggest con: almost all of the encounters are simple, straightforward combat encounters. Just so many of the content here is just, like the Snow White one, it's just, she's a white with zombies, go fight her. The Redcap one is, it's a Redcap with mushrooms, go fight him. Some of them do provide, a little bit more involved. Red Riding's Hood, at least has the twist there, but it still ultimately just ends in it. That's why I appreciate Tailor the Giant one so much, because it does involve skill checks and role playing more than just combat. And some of them, the combat's more interesting than others, but the ones that are like only a single page tend to suffer the worst from that. They're just very, very overly simplistic, I would say. Final verdict for Grimm Encounters. Grimm Encounters provides a dozen short, twisted encounters, though drawn from classic fairy tale stories, though most are heavily weighted towards combat. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own Dungeons and Dragons adventure here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.